Second slide. There you go. Question of the day. And I'm sure that all of you thought about that, but this is what we're going to start talking about. Is there a difference between using over-the-counter eyeglasses and using over-the-counter hearing aids? Because you all know that hearing aids are being made available now without prescription to people who have so-called mild to moderate loss. And if you're an audiologist, you look at that with a little askance, because we understand how variegated hearing loss is, and that even when a loss is supposed to be mild or moderate, the ability to wear application depends on a lot of adjustment by the user and by the fitter, whoever it might be. So at any rate, we're going to look at some of the factors that impact this question. Okay, next. Now, in order to do that, we have to understand a little bit more about vision, because the difference between hearing and vision, both being senses, is pretty dramatic in terms of their anatomy and physiology and how they work. So vision is we're going to look at vision first, and then later we'll compare hearing to vision. So you can see 75% of the people use some kind of visual correction, and there's a lot of eyeglasses. And I've seen some data that said over-the-counter eyeglasses account are up in the millions. I'm talking to you about the readers that people look at. How can they pick? The question is, how can they go to a store, see an assortment of glasses and try them on, and one of them is clearer than the other, and be okay? Can we do that with hearing aids? Next slide. Well, here goes a little bit of the issue. If you look on the left, you'll see there are some titles. There you go. One of them is iris. Okay, that of course is that's the blue part of your eye. Then lens right below that. That's right, and that's behind the outside of the eye. And then the pupil, which opens and closes, which is right below that. These are the three important elements in the eye that focus the visual image. And let's try the next slide. Up on the left, it says a colored surround of the dark pupil through which light enters, and we already talked about that. You see that black circle in the back of the circle, that black part on the right, what's pointing to, called the retina, is a carpet of receptor cells that line the back of your eyes, and that's what captures the image information. So the light then comes in through the iris and through the lens and goes, and it is focused then on the back of the retina. And at the retina, the information is changed to electrical or neural impulses and travels to the brain. Okay, I'm particularly interested in you understanding the natural lens, which is on the lower right. This sits between the pupil and helps you to see up close until it stiffens with age. Now, that is not an issue if you're wearing a hearing aid when you're really young, but if you're trying to use a hearing aid later on, or if you, excuse me, eyeglasses, you're trying to use eyeglasses and your prescription changes because things get blurry. This usually because the natural lens is getting kind of old and not working like it did. And then on the left is the cornea. That's just the front part of the eye. Okay, next. It gets a little bit more complicated, but not really. This is just, you see all of those elements on the right. These they call photoreceptor cells, and they line the retina in the back of the eye. And they're the points where the visual image is changed to a neural impulse. How it's done, we're not going to explain, but that's what happens. And so that, and there are two kinds of cells. One is a rod cell, that's the gray one. And the other red and blue and green are the photoreceptors, are called cones, and they take care of color. And so when the image strikes them because of the way they operate, the physiology. They send off a little electrical impulse, which goes to the next nerve cell, which is collected to it, and it sends off a little impulse. And that is how the level or that color at that particular point goes up to the brain. It's a series of electrical impulses in the optic nerve. That's all of our nerves work. They're all related to electricity. Okay, next. You can skip this one. Okay, so there are 1 million fibers that come out of the retina, okay, and carry the electrical nerve impulses of visual images up to the brain. And you can see the various way stations that they pass through. The optic nerve, one serves the left ear, one serves the right ear. They cross over with each other on the way up, and they can become refined, become duplicated, and they eventually end up in what's called the visual cortex, which is a place at the brain where the image is recognized, and then you know that what you are seeing. Brain is more marvelous than we can even imagine, and we take it granted all the time, but it's working for us in a really positive way. Okay, next. Now, we're going to spend some time on focusing. The iris, the cornea, and lens, okay, which are at the left of this particular, of the eye, their primary job is to focus the sound on the retina so that it is clear. Next slide. So on the top, this is what happens when you have normal vision. On the lower left, you have what happens when you're nearsighted. The image that comes in is out of focus. In fact, it goes to focus before it gets to the retina. And then on the right, for farsightedness, the image comes in and it extends beyond the retina, or not really beyond, but it just is not focused. So in those two instances, farsighted and nearsightedness, it's a focusing problem. It's not a neural problem. It's not the nerve that's connected to it that's gone wrong here. It is something within the eye, and the shape of the eye, and the shape and the function of the lens, and the other focusing elements that are not working normally. Next. So if you're farsighted, you look on the left, you can see on top where it says focus up there, you can see where the focus when you're farsighted is not very good at the point of the retina, and down below. How do you correct it? You correct it with lens, glasses, eyeglass, because that will take the light and it will refocus the signal so that when it gets into the ear, into the eye, into the retina, it's clear. Well, that's for farsightedness is one way, and then on the right, it shows nearsighted. So I spent a lot of time on this focusing because it's important for us to understand how the eye operates, that the eye operates differently from the ear. But this is the focusing is what allows people to go to a store and pick up glasses and put it on and see pretty good, because all they've had is an issue with focusing, not with any destruction of the neural pathways or the receptors in the eye. Is that clear, what I'm pointing out here? I hope. All right, so next. Now, when we get old, of course, we get a little bit of degradation of all of our senses. All of the physiology of the body changes and begin to lose cells. We begin to, they don't work as well as they did before. In the eyes, the ability to change focus is related to the lens of the eye that I pointed out before because it becomes less flexible due to age. So presbyopia is called, is the name for aging, loss of vision. So they use an artificial or mechanical replacement for the deficient operation of the lens, and those are called eyeglasses. So the bottom line, as I've talked about, is presbyopia is not due to deterioration of the retina or to those little receptors inside or the optical nerve. It's merely a question of correct focusing, or more primarily correct focusing. Okay, next. So that a person can go to a store and look at that, 315 million pairs of readers. That's what they call these ones that you can pick up off of the counter. They're called readers, okay? And of course, as we talked about before, all they're really doing is magnifying the image and or changing the image by means of the way the glass is ground so that the image that gets back to the retina is nice and clear. That's the basic operation then of eyeglasses that don't need a prescription. Next. So we can skip, the bottom line is the most important. The blurry vision some older people experience is due to deficient focusing, not the damage to the retina or optical nerve. Well, I've said that before. Next. So we're back to our original question. If OTC eyeglasses work for people with blurry vision, why not, that should be not, why not over-the-counter hearing aids also work for people with mild to moderate hearing loss? Now, this idea is what has precipitated the introduction of over-the-counter hearing aids, because the people, legislators and the other people, don't have a clear idea of the difference of operation of the eyes in relation to the ears. And we're going to talk about that in a minute. And as a result, they think there's a one-to-one correlation here. A mild loss is not very bad. A lot of people have it as they get older. You ought to be able to pick up something off the counter and put it in your ears. It makes it louder. In the same way, you pick up a reader off of a display, put it on your eyes, you can see more clearly. This misunderstanding of how the eye works in relationship and the ear works is what we're talking about today, because they're two different animals. Next. So I said, to answer this, we'll make a painless as possible dive into how the ear works. Now, the ear works really, really in a more complicated way than the eyes. That was easy to understand. Here I'm going to have to do a lot of proof by arm waving. I'll have to do this or do that so that it's clear what I'm talking about. So that is the whole auditory system right there. Next. And if we look on the part up and right where it says summarization or the summarization of the events, here is the way that we hear throughout the whole system. Now, I want you to realize too, if it isn't clear, and it probably is, that sound is merely a sequences of vibrations. When we talk, the vocal folds open and close and disturb the air. Some of it, if we make high sounds, the vocal folds are going to go fast, and low sounds will go really slow. And so any sound in the total environment starts with a vibration somewhere. If you're in an anechoic chamber where there is no sound, it means that there's no source of vibration there. And the molecules of air that are adjacent to the source of vibration will hit another molecule that's next to it, and next, and then keep going like that. That's called a sound wave, because you can also show that in a different manner. So sound waves just mean, in this instance, a series of vibrations that are transmitted through the air to the eardrum, which vibrates, of course, in consonance with the back and forth movement of the particles. And then, and you can see at the bottom there, Bertie, will you go to the bottom one and point out where the malleus and the stapes is? Okay, and the incus, yeah, right there. But we know that those three little bones down there act as kind of transformers, and they pick up the sound from the eardrum and they make it a little bit louder. The key to this is that there is the stapes, you can see the stapes down there, has a foot plate that pushes into this part of the hearing mechanism. This is the auditory nerve and the balance nerve. The auditory nerve is this little cochlea, this little snail, and this up above, these little canals up above are for balance. Okay, up above, there you go. They subserve balance. And the same end organ then subserves both hearing and balance. But we're only, and the nerve impulses go up essentially on the same nerve. Okay, so now we've gotten the vibration at the entrance to the cochlea through what's called an oval window. This is the tricky part. In this cochlea, it's filled with fluid. It's filled with fluid, and the movement of the stapes in moves the fluid. There also is a window down here where, because when you push fluid one way, on the bottom, you got to have it come out. You have to relieve it. It can't just stay in there. You don't have waves. So it sends in a series of waves all along the cochlea. We're going to see the cochlea unwound later on, and we'll see a lot of points of reference that we'll want to remember. Now, before we go ahead, the part of the outer ear and the stapes, okay, the middle ear, those two parts, those are equivalent to blurring with eyeglasses, okay? It's a mechanical delivery of sound, just like the lens deliver the visual image. So those two things are equivalent in the hearing system but if you have a problem with the outer ear or the middle ear, it can be usually corrected by surgery sometimes, unless it gets too bad. And that has nothing to do with the auditory nerve. So here's the point. If you can get a sound without any distortion through the middle ear and into the cochlea, then it will go up to the ear, up to the brain without any distortion at all. So then hearing loss, most hearing loss, is not of this conductive type where the middle ear is involved. It's sensory neural or nerve type, which you've all heard before, because there's a dysfunction in the nerve. Whereas in vision, the nerve is perfectly okay. All they need is a clear, unblurred image. Here, you can have a clear, unblurred, use the same word, stimulus going to the cochlea, but from then on, it's changed. And it's changed in unknown ways. We have investigated this, not me, medicine, researchers, in every rich way to try to discern what are the changes that are occurring in the cochlea due to damage of the cochlea itself. And that can be damaged by noise, which is a real obvious one, by age, which is called presbycusis, by toxic substances, or can be damaged by illness or from congenital issues. So our focus in fitting hearing aids, or knowing how to fit hearing aids, has to do with understanding what is lost and what we're trying to replace with the hearing aid. Now then, if we go ahead through, Bertie, can we move to the beyond the movement of fluid? And no, well, okay. Can you go back one? Yeah. Okay, the second to the last bottom particular box says hair cells of organ of Corti get stimulated by vibration in the basilar membrane. We're going to show you what that means in just a minute. And then the auditory nerve transmits impulses to the brain. Okay, next. I know I'm taking a lot of time on this, but it's important. So this is just another view of the same thing we've looked at. We can go ahead. Next. So here's the whole connection here. Here is the cochlea without its shell on the outside, if you will. And now, Bertie, I want you to take the pointer and find where it says oval window. It's down to the left. There you go, right. That is, excuse me, go down to the round window. It's below that, excuse me, there, okay. That's the place where the stapes is causing waves, like as if the same kind of waves that you see when you drop a rock in the water and they diminish over time. They're very heavy at the beginning, okay. That's what happens there. The cochlea is put together in such a way that because of its elasticity at various parts all the way around, the wave is going to have maximum displacement, okay? And it can happen at the base where high frequencies are mediated, the fast ones, and that's where the wave then is moving up and down fastest, or all the way up at the apex where low frequency sounds are mediated. So all along that continuum, there is a number of waves coming in, each of which is related to the particle movement that was started by vibration. So all of these things are transmitted almost instantly, aren't they? And those waves that are going through the cochlea there, and where its maximal peak resides, is related to a particular set of frequencies. So low frequencies are mediated by positions on the cochlea way at the top and high frequencies at the bottom. Now the next one over gets a little bit complicated. If you took a cross section of this whole tunnel that contains the waves and that, it would look like this. So you have, can you point at the upper canal? Hello? Yeah, up on top. Okay. This then is where the waves are started. Go down to the lower canal now. And this is the reverse of that because they're going out. But in between those two is what's called the organ of Corti, and this is where the movement of the waves, okay, that are occurring are changed to electrical impulses. Now down below, Bertie, let's go down to the bottom, okay. The basic construction of this organ of Corti is what's called hair cells, and there's two kinds. There's an outer hair cell that's up on top there, and then next to it is the inner hair cells. And on top of that is what's called a tutorial membrane, which is nothing more than a membrane that's fastened and that can move. It moves as the waves go through the cochlea. Next. So let's talk about this again. When the footplate moves inward, a traveling wave goes up the cochlea. The point of maximal displacement is correlated with the frequency of the movement of the stapes. A low, slow frequency stimulus results in a depression at the apex of the cochlea, and rapid high frequency movements of the stapes result in an area of maximal displacement at the basal end. So frequencies are separated out in the cochlea from high to low. And here are some other, you can look at the sketches, but they're repeating the same thing that I just talked about. Next. Here's another picture of the cochlea unwound, if you will, and another picture of the waves that are traveling along, which are stimulating hair cells. Next. Now you have to, this is kind of a hard thing to visualize, but this is a section of that tube that goes all the way up Okay, and this section and what it's showing is how the inner hair cells are related to the outer hair cells. Now, each one of those, let's say, rows of hair cells subserves a frequency. What I mean by just to put a hearing aid from off the counter onto the ear and expect good amplification. And what I talked about, what I've titled this is what the audiologist knows and doesn't know when fitting a hearing aid, because we know some things, but not all. Usually there's 3 steps for a complete workup, but there are other things that can be done. The left audiometric workup you're all familiar with. Real ear testing, which I'm going to discuss, and then impedance testing, which measures the middle ear. The only time you use that is when you're trying to confirm that a person has a conductive loss, not a nerve loss. Next. Here's this audiogram that you're all familiar with. On top, you can see the numbers of the frequencies. By the way, 500 there represents middle C on a piano. So that's low. So that's where low pitches on this chart are recorded. And up at the right-hand end on top, up at the right, is where the high pitches are displayed on this chart. And then going down, we're looking about loudness, okay, intensity. So we know how the audiologist tests. He gives you a series of beeps at 1 or 2 of the frequencies, and then he records how loud it has to be made before it is recognized by the listener. Now, I was asked a question earlier by one of our attendees about why some frequencies are not being transmitted properly. The fact is that all frequency intensity in speech, there are different intensities for different part of the speech. All of those pitches that are above 1,000 on the chart here, all those frequencies or pitches, okay, are the most important for understanding speech. That's the sounds like sh, t, k, p, ch, okay, that are made just by blowing air. They're very, very soft, and they are hard to discriminate between. There isn't a lot of nerve fiber that supports those high frequencies, and yet, when we have hearing loss, usually the high frequencies are the ones that go first, unfortunately. At the low end, you're talking about, in speech, the vowels and the voiced consonants. They're usually very loud, and they're easy to discriminate by comparison. So when the audiologist looks at the audiogram and they're done testing, he has a fair idea of where the loss is, and he knows, or she knows, what probably has to be done. Next. Here's a right and left ear. Red is right, blue is left, with a mild to moderately severe hearing loss. Okay, it's very common. We see this all the time. All the way down at the bottom, where it says 190 and 80, if we had marks down there, what we're really doing is picking up sensations, physical sensations, because the nerve endings are actually dead. So you lose enough high frequency hearing, you're just wrecked all of the nerve endings, all of the hair cells that subserve the high frequencies. Okay, next. Now then, if you test speech, and some of you have probably been exposed to this and that, and my speech testing, I say they make it at a comfortable level and they say words and you repeat them back. And you can do pretty good sometimes if you don't have too severe a loss in understanding and repeating the words. When you get into noise, however, unless it's tested for by the audiologist, we have very little idea of knowing how much the noise is going to impact the speech, but it can be measured. Now then, if the customer, the patient, has 2 different hearing losses in each ear, then Each ear has a different set of nerve impulses going up to the brain. And that's related to the destruction or the damage to the auditory nerve on one side or the other. The brain takes those distorted signals that are coming up and it puts them together and gets an idea of what's being spoken, even though the ones that are coming up softer or louder than the other, with frequency issues, that is damage, that are different one from the other. Next. Now then, we're going to get into, I have to move my audiogram over here. This is interesting. When we do pure tone testing, like the audiogram that I showed earlier, the research says they only need about 20 or 30% of the fibers in the nerve that subserve that frequency for the tone to be recognized. So if you put your hand up when you have a moderately severe or severe loss and say you've heard the tone, you may hear the tone, but 80% of the fibers that are surrounding that specific frequency are damaged or gone. So what is the audiologist faced with? We're faced with trying to put sound into the ear so that average normal speech is understood, so that soft speech is understood, and that it doesn't get too loud. Now you'll see on the right spectrum here, or the right form, right? Those little dots up there. What that is a prediction of where loud sounds become uncomfortable. And at the bottom where you see the red dots, that is the average normal hearing for people. So there's a big range between the lowest sounds you can hear and where it becomes uncomfortable. And speech should fall in between that real soft area where you can just detect sounds and the real loud areas where it's uncomfortable, and you can see where it says normal speech energy. Now you can translate that to an audiogram, which is shown on the left. And you see that yellow thing that looks like a banana? What that is showing is where the speech sounds fall, okay, across frequencies. And you'll see that on the right, the hissing sounds are lost. Some of them don't even fall in the range because they're so soft, okay? And then at the bottom, almost all the low frequencies are heard. So actually this banana, this yellow banana, is equivalent to what on the other format is called normal speech energy. These are just two different ways of showing normal speech energy. Next. If you look at where the normal speech sounds fall for a normal hearing and you put it on the audiogram, you end up with that gray area. And if you have a hearing loss, you can see where they lose a lot of the sounds. Next. Now, this is an interesting, just an aside right here. Conversation in the press and among other people is that we should be fitting mild hearing losses easily with over-the-counter hearing aids. I have seen about 500 of these kinds of graphs, and you can see, and each of these lines, the thin ones, represent a person's hearing loss. Now, this was developed because they wanted to do research. They averaged up the thresholds across frequency for all of these different hearing losses that are shown here, and they ended up with an average where the red and the blue is. Now, people talk about an average hearing loss. There is no average hearing loss. That's the point. All of them are different, and they're different enough so that there's a substantial difference between the person with the so-called mild hearing loss here as opposed to to another. Next. Okay, we can skip this. Next. Now then, how much gain in the hearing aid? That is, how much intensity should we have in a hearing aid to make the sound when a person is hearing it, okay, appropriate at soft and medium and loud levels, okay? And what we've found over a long period of time, that if we have pure tone thresholds, we can, by use of a formula, guess how loud the gain should be. Because on the average, all the people in the research, all of those people told us when it was moderately loud, medium loud, soft, and loud for each frequency that was put in. And then the software, this formula is in software and it's put into a computer that is connected to the circuitry in the hearing aids. The circuitry in the hearing aids then can be changed. That means you can emphasize highs or lows or other uncomfortable level, all that kind of stuff, by the computer mediating it, okay? So the software in the beginning selects an initial amount of gain based on the formula and also on the hearing loss you're dealing with and the aid to be fitted. So what we're trying to do here then is to present sounds to the ear with a hearing loss that's different than anybody else's, okay, that has distortion and loudness, okay, because we showed earlier that when you have a hearing loss, you also have a smaller distance between uncomfortable and comfortable. And the growth then of loudness is different for every person. And we're trying to figure out when we're fitting a hearing aid, how loud does it have to be in this instance? Now, in the early days, what they used to do is have machines where they put different responses of hearing aids into the ear. And if a person liked that, then you're supposed to be fitted with a hearing aid that was like that. And it didn't work because the machines contained all kinds of circuitry and components that were not in the hearing aid. So there wasn't a one-to-one correspondence. This is the closest that we have come after testing and research groups and groups and groups of people, having them respond when the sound that is being put in sounds pretty normal. And as a result of that, we end up with a formula based on the pure tones that we hope is pretty good, but we don't know because nobody knows how sound is being processed above threshold. Next. In the individual instance. So here's what I was talking about. You can see that red line there is upward sloping. Remember, and this is the format where you have real soft sounds at the bottom and then real loud sounds up on top, okay? And so if we plot the hearing loss, the hearing thresholds that are on the audiogram on this kind of format, it'll look like this, where high frequency loss really goes up higher and higher, which means that if you look on the left, it takes a lot of energy, okay, in order to be heard at that frequency. And the portion of the thresholds at the low frequencies, it doesn't take as much energy. That means that at the high frequencies in this particular kind of hearing loss, there is a tremendous diminution of the hearing range into which we have to put the loudness so that people can hear the speech energy, which is shown down below. So what we're really doing is moving the speech energy, right here, moving it up and putting it into the hearing loss hearing range, okay? With this kind of hearing loss, most of the speech energy is lost. Now the hearing aid then has to, by frequency, okay, has to adjust the speech energy by means of the formula so that it falls within the hearing range of the impaired ear. I hope that's clear. Probably complicated, but that's what we deal with when we're fitting a hearing aid. Next. Okay, now there is a certain kind of equipment called real ear measurement equipment, which allows us to check whether the sound that we are producing through the hearing aid is loud enough. And this is pretty complicated, but you can see if you look where the ear is, and to the right of the ear, there is, yeah, to the right, yeah. First of all, where you just were is a tube. There's a little tube that goes into the ear, okay? And it measures the amplification coming from a live hearing aid. And so we will know then at the eardrum how much sound or how much sound pressure the person is experiencing. Next. And this is another depiction of the same thing. That square thing going into the ear is the hearing aid, and up on top going into the ear, the gray tan. That is an experimental hearing aid going into the ear. And then right below that is a little tube that goes into the ear that measures how much sound is being made in there. And this way we can begin to find out whether or not formula is putting the sounds properly in the speech range according to that person's hearing loss. Next. Now this is how this is all displayed. On the left side of the chart, the blue line is the hearing loss. And those green dots, you see the green dots? The green dots are the targets the formula tells us we have to adjust the gain to. And in this instance, the continuous line has been achieved very close to the dot. So that means this person hears soft sounds right above their threshold where they should. Same thing goes on the right. So those dots on the right, yeah, those dots are targets that show up on the screen, put there by the formula. And now we have to make sure that the sound pressure that we're putting into the ear is aligned along those dots. Okay, that will give us then the ability to hear soft speech. Next, theoretically. How about average speech? Well, here's another set of targets. The purple, same hearing loss, the purple dots are then the targets for speech that's a little bit louder, that falls right in the middle of the hearing range. And we've accomplished that. The person who's fitting the hearing aid was able to adjust frequency by frequency the loudness of the stimulus so that it catches the targets. Next. And finally, if you can see up above the light blue line or greenish blue line, the formula also tells us, depending on the hearing loss, how loud we can make the sound before it becomes uncomfortable. And in this instance, it is less than what the targets were, okay? And then we know that we fitted a person where average speech is loud enough, theoretically, where soft speech is being heard, and for loud sound is not too much. Now we have to do this across the frequencies, and you remember that the hearing loss varies by frequency in the audiogram, which means that the person who's fitting the hearing aid has controls to either increase or decrease the loudness at those various frequencies from low to high, and assume that this will provide a accurate reception of speech, which is appropriate. Next. Okay, the formulas are not foolproof. I've already told you why. Every hearing loss is different. Each ear may have suffered unequal damage to the various hair cells that are positioned along the basilar membrane. The hair cell damage may range from little impairment in one area to serious loss in another. And so what happens in hearing is you can bring it down to what is the situation with the hair cells. Are they damaged a lot or not so much? Go ahead, next. This is the loudness I was talking about before. We'll not spend any time on that next. But it is the great unknown in hearing aids. The result is, despite having an idea of how much hearing aid gain is required, the degree of hair cell damage and its effect on loudness and speech intelligibility cannot be predicted. We're just making guesses. Two patients with similar audiograms can have significantly different ability in understanding speech or tolerance for loud sounds, depending on the damage to the cochlea. Now, the hearing aids are made these days to have 8 or 12 channels spread across the frequency range, which sound comes through in the hearing aid that can be adjusted up or down. So that these channels, the more channels you have in the hearing aid, the more adjustability you have, the better your ability to make speech clear and loud enough. Next. Okay, then there are two other things that are involved that we haven't even talked about, and we won't. The first one is how skilled is the audiologist that's doing the fitting. That's a crapshoot, and I don't mean that in a bad way. How good is the doctor that you go to related to other doctors? How much skill does he have? So that's something that's an unknown in the fitting system, isn't it? The second one is the adjustment to amplification by the patient, who hasn't heard many of these sounds for years that he's being exposed to now, which are put in there because theoretically they make speech clearer. And that the brain says up there, what's this strange array of signals coming up the auditory nerve that I've never heard before, okay? And how does it relate to words, to speech, to understanding? And this marvelous brain eventually, over a period of time, as the ear is exposed to the new amplification, begins to adjust. And it starts to sound pretty good most of the time. Sometimes it's always bad. But over a period of time, if people will wear their hearing aids and they don't have a really severe to profound loss, they should be able to adjust to the new amplification that comes in. So the bottom question is then, would you agree with those that say we ought to be able to fit mild hearing losses with over-the-counter hearing aids the same way we fit glasses for people that have blurry vision? Would you agree? That's up to each of you. But I'll give you my conclusion. I think over-the-counter hearing aids are a great idea. I think that the chance of correction is a crapshoot, just like it is when we're fitting hearing aids. And you may have a hearing aid that you buy at Walmart or someplace like that, which provides amplification. And they use the formulas also. This provides amplification, which is pretty good. A lot of these hearing aids have adjustment capability, but you have to use your telephone to do that. So in your telephone, it tells you how to raise high frequencies and lower lows. The thing that I would be real careful about is whether you get your money back if they don't work. Some of these OTC hearing aids are $900 and $1,500 a piece, which is pretty darn expensive. It's a big outlay if they don't work. So that's one thing that's important to think about. And another thing is, does this company have the capability to repair the aid over a period of time? I mean, if it goes bad within 6 months, will they repair it for you or send you a new one? So all of these, so what happens to the person in all innocent that walks in and picks a hearing aid up for a loss? He knows he's beginning to not hear well, picks up the hearing aid and puts it on his ear in this kind of picture. What is that person's appreciation of amplification? Does he get ticked off and say, they don't work, I'm not going to get a hearing aid, and then they don't get hearing aids? Or do they say, this doesn't work, I think I got to go get some more help? And that's where the audiologist comes in. Okay, next. That's the end. Oh my goodness. So I've given you kind of a difficult, I know it's difficult, but I hope that some of this information that I provided makes it clear. about all of the things that are involved with putting hearing aids, fitting hearing aids to people with hearing loss. And with that, I'm finished and I'll entertain questions.